Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rui Diaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle!
The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
Rothrock!
All creatures great and small!
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder at Heart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Old Cup seriously.
This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest. Welcome back to another episode of Nos Arietes on the Sounder at Heart podcast network. I know I told you that we probably had done our last What We Learned this week, but that does not mean that we are done with Nico Moreno. Today, there was some breaking news. Danny Leyva looks like he is going to get transferred to Necaxa of Liga MX. It is, we don't know a lot of details other than what's out there. We have both independently confirmed that this looks like it's likely to happen. But Nico, welcome back to the show. And it's fun to have something, we'd been talking about trying to record, but we didn't have anything really to talk about. But now we have something to talk about.
That's right. And it came from left field, to be quite honest. I have to say that I did not see this move coming. I either slept through it or did not quite have it in my bingo cards. I mean, quite honestly, I had been looking absolutely everywhere else and not the Danny Leyva side. So we'll get to talk about it. But yeah, today we do get to record with some newsy type of good, solid information, which is always nice for our audience. But yeah, just happy to hop back on the mics there, Jeremiah.
Yeah. It's funny. You mentioned not really seeing this coming, and I was right there with you. I did not see this coming. In fact, I thought Danny Leyva, I had big expectations, big hopes for Danny Leyva with the Sounders in 2026. And part of my thinking was the window on Danny moving to Mexico or somewhere else had sort of closed to me. It seemed like he had, the Sounders had done the loan to Colorado. Clearly other teams had, knew that Danny was available. He was still here. And then he had a pretty productive season last year. He made the most out of his appearances. I don't remember him having an out and out bad performance in any game that he played in. Whenever he started, the Sounders looked really good. He played a variety of, he played both as a 10 and sort of as a 6-8 hybrid. And it looked like the Sounders were sort of finally understanding what they had in Danny Leyva, when I think even as recently as last year, there really was not a strong sense of what his best position was. It wasn't until late last year or late in 2024 that they even toyed with the idea of playing him as a 10. But this year we saw him play a little bit more as a 10, but we still saw him sitting a line back. And, he was João Paulo's most common partner. I really liked what I saw of him. And I saw a possibility that, especially if Obed Vargas got moved this winter, that Danny Leyva was to me, the favorite to be the starter next to Christian Roldan. And I was kind of falling in love with that possibility.
Both you and I, Jeremiah. And I think, it's important to note that this report has come through and about from a reliable source. CL Merlo tends to be well informed. Of course, you have now confirmed that information. You have added a couple of things that I feel like you should definitely provide that additional information. But in general senses, I agree with you. I was almost certain that once Obed Vargas would eventually part ways with the Sounders and move on to his next chapter in his career, that Danny Leyva was the most proven, was the most experienced, was the one that was familiar with the system. This Sounders team has, without a doubt, thrived on being a cohesive unit and a collective play that services off of specific players doing specific roles. And to me, Danny Leyva had improved in several phases of his game, including his ability on the ball, his dynamism, the amount of ground he covered. He's always been a phenomenal passer, probably the best passer on the team, had continued to be a player that could be influential from set pieces. So aside this growth where, although, and as we've mentioned in other shows, he was going to not necessarily play that position to the level of Obed Vargas, he was certainly going to be interesting to put his own signature on the way that pivot with Christian Roldan would work. And now we are blindsided, or at least I was, with this information that he is leaving. And I mean blindsided because I understand that there is a guy like Snyder Burnell that is ready to go, that Brian Spencer has been very high on, that he even compared to Albert Rusnak in the end of season presser because of his ability to come in late into the box and put himself in good scoring positions. But he continues to be a guy that is a little green, right? A little wet around the ears. I feel that that's a correct saying there.
Yeah, it is.
And so because of that, I'm a little surprised. I think that there's options around this move. Maybe it's a domino that is going to fall and others might follow, but let's just keep it there so you could add on information, and we'll continue to talk about this Danny Leyva situation.
Yeah. So another reason I was sort of blindsided by this, aside from sort of just the general expectation that Danny sort of had a real future with the Sounders, was that I've been talking to, Sounders people for the last few days, and not a hint that something like this was in the offing. So I don't know if that's because it was a sort of like a sudden development, or if people were just being coy, or maybe they didn't know. I don't know. But either way, I had not really gotten any indication, and it wasn't just because we were sort of sleeping on, oh, well, nothing's happening. No. We've been making our phone calls and doing all that kind of stuff. So
we were out there, man.
Yeah, and it just sort of seemed like the window on Danny moving abroad had sort of closed. But you pull that aside from it, and it does make some sense. Let's talk about this before we'll get into the whole Sounders angle on this. But from a Danny Leyva perspective, I think it does make some sense. One is, let's keep in mind that he's a dual citizen, so he has a Mexican passport. He counts as a domestic player for Liga MX teams. That's obviously a big deal. His dad, I believe, is Mexican. He still has family there. I don't think and I guess Necaxa is relatively close to Mexico City, and I think his family is from Mexico City. I'm getting a little over my skis here, but I think that makes some sense. Necaxa is also notably the team that Eva Longoria has been running, and is partly owned by Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds of Welcome to Wrexham fame. They did when they bought into Necaxa, part of the deal was that they were going to do a documentary series on Necaxa that ran this, last summer and into September. I believe it was following the previous Clausura. I'm not exactly sure which season they got footage from, but they they had a rough go of it this last tournament. They finished 13th in the Apertura. They had been coming off a 5th place finish in the Clausura. So they're sort of an up and down team. They've not had a lot of highs, but they're consistently they're an interesting team. There's some interesting energy around them. And I could definitely see why they would be interested in an English speaking Mexican and, a bilingual Mexican American like Danny Leyva, whose game I think a lot of people had thought would translate well to Mexico. So from that perspective,
Correct.
it does make a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The way his skill set fits into Necaxa, fits into what I believe they want to play in, doesn't just fit well for what Danny Leyva provides, but I do feel like it ultimately makes him that much more effective in Liga MX, because the game down there is not as direct and quick as it is in MLS. And if there was ever any doubts or things about Danny Leyva that I felt like people wanted to see more of, was that athleticism, the dynamism, and playing for the Necaxa and the way they play. And what I'm hearing is that they're going to play with 2 pivots next season. It does fit in well with what Danny does. I think that he's a guy that's going to be able to provide a lot of services to a guy like Cambindo that consistently wants to get behind the back line. So I do understand why he'd be attractive to Necaxa. And I do think that, and this is hard to say because both you and I were very high on Danny Leyva going into 2026. I don't know if this move and the willingness for the Sounders to let him go is attached to a phenomenal offer, because I don't see that being the case. From what I'm hearing, that's not necessarily the case. But it might be more of we're going to allow him to go somewhere where he's going to get a lot of minutes. And maybe we can start with a guy like Snyder Burnell that does feel more like a Brian Smetzer guy. And maybe there's a possibility to bring in an experienced midfielder to see what he can provide.
Yeah. So I asked someone about the fee here, and they didn't give me a number. And I sort of phrased it in a vague way. I just wanted to sort of get a sense of like, what kind of money are we talking about here? And they told me, well, it's enough to make it worth our while. And, combined with getting his salary off the books. And to me, what that says is they probably weren't blown away by the offer. But, I would say this is that if it's $1 million transfer, that has to be considered a really positive move. I suspect it's probably less than that, maybe in the 500 to 750 range. We'll see. I would love to be wrong and for it to be a bigger number. But either way, the Sounders are probably opening up, somewhere in the $1 million to $1.5 million in cap space, because they, Danny was making $350 last year. I suspect he had a raise built into his contract. Maybe that brings him up closer to 400. And if the Sounders are able to clear $1 million off their salary cap, they had $1.6 million in cap space as it was. So, presumably they feel like they can replace Leyva for less than they are. They can potentially upgrade Leyva for ideally less than the space that he's opening up, because that would potentially give him an opportunity to go out and sign someone at a max salary player. So it's something in the 830 range. That's the number that we thought that Paul Rothrock was going to be going after. It potentially brings a Hassani Dotson type of player into their price range. That would be an interesting way to replace Danny Leyva, is to go out and get another, local kid who has a pretty good MLS resume, even if he's been dealing with some injuries recently. So it'll be very interesting to see what they do. I don't know, though, what this really says about the Sounders' bigger plan. One thing it does indicate to me, and I don't know, maybe you feel differently, but one thing it does indicate to me is that the Sounders are going into this offseason with the expectation that Obed Vargas will still be on their roster. And if you look at it, if that's the perspective they're coming at this from, you can see why letting Danny Leyva go now makes a lot more sense, because if you're planning on moving Obed Vargas, Danny Leyva moves in, that's a great replacement, right? But if Obed Vargas is here, look, you're going to be playing. I know there are people, and I understand the inclination to say, like, look, if Obed won't accept a transfer and he's going to sort of force us to play out his contract, we shouldn't play him. Well, that's just sort of cutting off your nose to spite your face. Obed Vargas is a very good player who can help you win games. If the Sounders feel like, if Obed Vargas is on this team, I fully expect him to play significant minutes. And if Obed Vargas is your starter, Danny Leyva probably does not have a whole lot of minutes, and it probably made sense to let him go when they got the offer to let him go.
Yes, and that actually brings up a good point that I'm sure we'll hit later in this show. But if we take anything from Craig Waibel's response to my questions on Obed Vargas and how defensive he got, and the fact that he told me that he sees things very differently than I do, because I've been indicating that it would be malpractice to allow a guy like Obed Vargas to walk away on a free. Maybe in his thought process is, look, if we were able to get 3 years, including another year of Obed Vargas helping out this team to win championships for $140,000 a year, rather than, had we extended his contract and reconstructed it 2 years ago, right now we'll be paying him, over $1.5 million, let's say, altogether, and then another year. Maybe that is what he meant by that. So in all regards,
maybe, he could have said, he could have said that, but yes, I agree with you. That's the possible. I think that's sort of the way he would defend it, is like, look, we got a championship caliber player for an extended period of time. I'm not really worried. It's not my problem. If he ends up walking, that's someone else's problem, which I think is not the right answer, but I guess is
me neither. But that's the way I would look at it, right? So with putting that on the table, it would be clear that Obed Vargas, if anything, is playing every minute of every game of every single match to make sure that you squeeze every single drop of juice out of that lemon, before you give it up. So, yes, I do agree. I think that there is a lot of that was assessed into this situation, but it's still to be seen on what could happen. I still feel like by what you open up in the salary cap and adding what you could get out of the transfer fee, and if you can turn that into some GAM, maybe you are able to go out there and get yourself a proven midfielder that can allow Snyder Burnell to continue to develop without the need to necessarily be tested by trial by fire, and immediately just jumped in right next to Christian Roldan. So there are options that could also come out of this move.
Yeah. I think you and I are on the same page as far as the Obed Vargas thing. That's not to say that there's not upside to keeping Obed Vargas for the year. I just think I think everyone understands that there is if the Sounders go into this season with the likelihood that Obed Vargas is just going to walk away for free, that is a bad outcome. Like, I understand it's there's other ways to look at this, but that part of it is bad. Now, we don't need to do a whole podcast about this, but I think that if Craig is asking us to sort of see his side of it, first of all, he has to make a much more compelling case than I see it differently than you guys. And that's on him. It's his job to make that case. If he wants to make that case, make the case, pitch us on it. But, I do think that sort of, I realize we already did a podcast talking about that interview, but this is, I do think it's worth getting into some of the messaging that came out of that. And I don't know if they had any suspicion that Danny Leyva was going to be moved, but they, I, in general, I just thought that they were really unnecessarily holding their cards close to the chest. If they knew that some outgoing moves were going to be going on, it would have been really easy at that point, I think, to say, look, we know we're going to have to make some moves outgoing in order to bring players in, but our intention is to be active this offseason. And instead they sort of gave us this whole thing about being very happy with how the season went, which is fine. They have a right to, I think they are justified in saying that they were happy with what they did last year. But I do think that they just sort of sent the wrong message in general. And Craig Waibel in particular sent the wrong message when he just sort of said, look, we had a good season. I don't really want to hear about next season until next season. It's like, well, that's not how this works.
Yes. And look, I already kind of went on a rant this morning on this subject, but I'm going to try to, in a way, compartmentalize it, maybe try to elaborate it into just one single spiel. I think that both you and I have been very good about highlighting the positives and the correct decisions that Craig Waibel has made with the roster. I think that we understand how difficult his job is because he doesn't have the blank checks that Arthur Blank is providing, or the Moss brothers, or just other, clubs that have a lot more capita. Mm-hmm. However, if there is something that I feel like, if there's an area of being a GM and a CSO that, in my opinion, Craig has digressed a bit on, is simply providing a positive outlook about his vision and where the team is going. And if we look back at the two less opportunities that Craig Waibel had in front of the mics,
we can go back to the Reed Baker Whiting little mini press conference as well, where he also didn't sort of give, like, and I'm not trying to cut you off here, but I think it's not that he's not out there giving a positive vision. I understand, like, that would be, it's that he's not really articulating any vision. He's just sort of talking about the results, and I want to be judged on results, and that's fine. But I also need you to understand that you're in a public facing job, and part of your job is to help us understand and make the case of why, of things beyond just like we're going nowhere. If all we're saying is judge me on the results and that's all I want to talk about, we're in the wrong business. Like, that's not what this business is about. It's not just results. It's about narratives, and it's about telling stories, and it's about, filling content and getting people excited. And
exactly
getting people interested, even if they're not excited, giving them something to talk about.
And that's what I mean about illustrating your vision positively, because it is your job as the face of the front office that's consistently in front of the mics to get people excited and taking away from the narrative that the team is complacent and the team doesn't want to do more, and the team isn't willing to go out there and spend. I understand, and we both do, the limitations that he has. But if he, going back to this specific end of season presser, if he phrases a couple of those questions that we asked in a different way, it doesn't seem to feed into what people already think, whether they're misconceptions or not, or whether fans, rightfully, because they do have that prerogative to be passionate about the team and say, look, I want more, and I want to be in the MLS finals every year, whatever it is that people have. You, as a GM, have to provide a sense of, we're going to continue to get better. But when the way that Craig Waibel answered your question about the U22, I felt like it was poor wording, saying, well, good thing that we didn't go out there and get a U22 because we got to see Osasa de Rosario. You didn't have to phrase it that way, because you cannot tell me that there isn't a U22 in the planet that would be a Salvetti for this team that could have been here to put you in the next level offensively or whatever you wanted to put them. So don't phrase it that way. Go ahead and puff out your chest and say, look, I made the right choice by bringing up a guy like Osase. Give him his due credit. Give him all the flowers you can, but don't phrase the question that way, because you sound complacent, and that as if it was your choice, that you had the money, you had the roster spot, but it was your decision that, you know what, this guy might be better, right? Because it just provides a negative output on, I don't know, your scouting, the way you were approaching the summer window. And the one that rubbed me the wrong way even more than the Obed Vargas dynamic and the back and forth that him and I have had was the question about the change of calendar. When I asked a general manager about the change of a calendar, this is a question that's been asked all around MLS, and GMs have been very good about talking about the positives of aligning with the top leagues in the world. And even if you're not in the market for those top guys, get people excited about the fact that as a GM, Craig Waibel has been ineffective, and maybe ineffective is not the word, but maybe it is, but just inactive and hasn't taken advantage of the summer window. So use that to say, hey, look, well, maybe now this is going to help that out. I'm going to be able to get more offers out. Just put it in a way that gets people excited. But when you dismiss the question, and I don't know if he was trying to be Joe Cool and maybe question my knowledge of when the start of the calendar was going to happen, and you say, well, this 12 months out and I'm not really worried about it, you don't sound like a qualified GM. I'm sorry to say that. But look, I learned from the best of the best in my world, which is Garth Lagerwey. And he would tell me every time, Nico, a GM has to see what's happening with the roster and the team 3 years ahead. You got to be thinking 3 years ahead. So I know for a fact that he has to be thinking about it, but he decided to answer it that way. And that's all that people heard was, my GM is not even thinking about the change of a calendar that's 12 months out. So when is he going to think about it? The day before, the week before, 6 months before? So that provides a negative outlook onto what you do as a GM. So that's my problem. I'm going to go ahead and take a breather and allow you to add on to the subject.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes No Sarietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible through our paid subscribers. Plans start as low as $30 a year and allow us to remain independent and mostly ad-free. Subscribers get access to all our written and podcast content, including a full-text RSS feed and a mostly ad-free podcast feed that includes every show in one spot. If you really like what we're doing, though, I'd encourage you to sign up at our higher tiers, which include all sorts of various perks. The most popular of those is our members-only Discord, where the real Sounders sickos hang out. I know I've called this group the smartest, funniest, and best-informed Sounders fans in the world, but it's more than the rough equivalent of a Sounders Mensa meeting. Discord is where we make things happen, like for real. You know the promotion the Sounders ran that offered fans the opportunity to trade in their Messi jersey for a Paul Rothrock one? That originated in our community. You'll not only be the first to know about stuff, but you also have a semi-direct line to the movers and shakers at the Sounders organization. If you want to be one of the totally normal people who occupy the Sounder at Heart Discord, just become a supporter of Sounder at Heart. Anyway, thanks for listening, and go Durs. No Sarietes, admittedly, is not exactly known for our spicy takes, but that doesn't mean we want our food to be mild. Spice up your life with Haxon Ferments. Handcrafted in Georgetown and made with the best local ingredients from across the Pacific Northwest, they specialize in unique small batch fermented hot sauces and vinegars. Haxon Ferments brings bold flavors and natural fermentation together for something truly special. Whether you're a heat seeker or just looking to elevate your cooking, you'll find something you love at haxonferments.com. That's HAXANFERMENTS.com. And right now, If you use the code SOUNDER@heart, that's all one word, at checkout, you will get a free hot sauce with your order. Again, go to hacksandferments.com, use the code SOUNDER@heart at checkout for a free hot sauce with your order. Hacks and Ferments is a proud sponsor of the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
So, I mean, I'll say this. I think on one hand, I guess I can appreciate where he's coming from, which is these are tomorrow problems and I'll worry about tomorrow problems tomorrow. I guess that's, or at least I'll get into it with you guys later. That's fine. But I just think he missed an opportunity to articulate a different vision. And, you know, you can look at the roster and I think you can pretty easily see that as much as this year, there weren't a lot of big options that needed to be exercised. It was a pretty straightforward year. I think this is maybe the most straightforward year the Sounders have had in terms of options to exercise and pending free agents. And so, you know, most of it, I think we saw where it was going to go. But next year, there's a whole lot of guys who have contract options coming. Next year going to get really interesting. And I think it was an opportunity for him to say, yeah, you know, we kind of feel like we're well positioned, or maybe they don't. I don't know. Maybe that's the problem. But, you know, you can go through this and there are a lot of players who are going to be coming up. You know, Yamar his contract is up after next year. Albert Rusnak has an option that comes up next year.
Jesus has an option.
Jesus, yeah, you're right. Jesus has an option. Oh no, Jesus is signed through 27. But
is it 27? Okay.
Yeah. Nuhu is out of contract at the end of next year. Alex Roldan has an option for next year. Danny Masovsky out of contract next year. Danny Leyva would have been would have had an option due. Kim Keehee is going to be out of contract next year. Obed Vargas is going to be out of contract next year. Cody Baker will have an option due. Stuart Hawkins will have an option due. Kalani Osaze, you know, you go down the roster, a lot of big players have options coming due or going to be out of contract next year. And, you know, honestly, it would have been an opportunity for him to say, like, look, you know, we feel like we have a lot of work to do to get ready for this. And we're already looking ahead to it. And I'm sure they are already looking ahead to it. Like the idea that the Sounders aren't forward looking and that they are sort of flying by the seat of their pants when it comes to cap management is crazy. And it's not true. So just be straight with us. You know, we want to tell your story. We want to be we want to be out there spreading the gospel of Craig Waibel, frankly. And instead it's become this, it's really kind of a strange thing because I feel like it's become sort of this antagonistic relationship. And it doesn't really have to be. I don't really feel like any of us are taking big shots at him. You know, if anything, I think most of the outlets that cover the Sounders have been pretty positive. I mean, the Sounders are coming off,
or at least us.
Season. At least us. Right. Exactly. The people that matter. Right.
Right. I mean, for real, there are, you know, because I will say that it's very often that I go into the Spanish media side, whether it's El Rey or whether it's to Unánimo or other places where I do Spanish you know, coverage. And there's usually a negative aspect of the Sounders have become infamous for being this shop at Goodwill sort of club and that they no longer have ambition. And I'm out there, you know, shield in hand because I understand. I have the insight to say, look, this is where the team is at. These are the good things about it. Look at the last couple of seasons. Look at this season specifically, what the team was able to achieve. But when you, as the GM, with your own words, kind of take it all the way by providing and feeding the fuel of those that don't believe that you qualify for the job, then it's difficult. It's difficult to do because I do. And I mean this sincerely, I do think that Craig Waibel means well. And I think that he has done well with what he has. It hasn't been perfect. There has been things that haven't worked out. But if you look at what Pedro was able to show you last season, if you look at what Albert has been able to do and perform, if you look at what Jesus was able to do in the contract that you got him on, and you look into the future and say, man, this guy could potentially be a real big pillar for this team on the offensive end for years to come. And even the Jordan Morris situation, where there have been injuries that honestly are beyond control. I mean, that shoulder injury that he had is not a reoccurring thing. It was a soccer collision that happens. Exactly. It was just something that you could not have put into paper. And even then, I think Jordan Morris is a guy that I continue to be high on. So Craig Waibel as a whole, with what he has, I think he's built a good roster, but it is those moments where he could provide a little bit more in order to say this team is going places. And don't say things like, look, if you could promise me an MLS Cup, I go out there and spend money on guys, because it doesn't sound well.
No, it doesn't. No.
When that's the message that you're sending, you know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That, I don't know. It'll be very interesting. That, that all said, it is going to be interesting to see how this, or if the Danny Leyva transfer ends up sort of changing the perspective on what the Sounders can do this offseason. It was looking like they were basically going to be in a situation where they were giving out raises and then filling out the roster, but not necessarily making any splashy signings. And this opens up the possibility, at least, that they could maybe make a little bit, make a signing on a player who at least is going to challenge for a starting spot. Whereas, as recently as this morning, I was not really thinking that was in the card, that the chances of them going out and signing someone who was going to challenge for a starting spot just wasn't very high. And I say that honestly, believing that the roster as is pretty strong. Like, I don't necessarily think they have glaring holes that need to be fixed. Like, could they get a winger who is a little bit closer to fully ready? Absolutely. Like, Pedro de la Vega is going to be out for some period of time. Georgie Manungu has question marks. Paul Arriola has question marks. Jesus Ferreira, I think, is in for a better year, but he also, he didn't put up big goal and assist numbers last year, so there's question marks around him. Could they go out and get someone who maybe is a little bit more of a sure thing? I think that this opens up that possibility.
Yes, absolutely. I continue to look at this roster, and although both you and I know that there's going to be guys like Yutsu Konome that are going to be added,
right?
Potentially a Peter Kingston, potentially a Tino
Gomez,
Lopez,
maybe. Right? Yeah.
There is room to go out there, and I think that's where going over the roster a couple more times, going back and looking at some games and digesting all the information, the conclusion that I've made, and has been different to what we said right after that presser, that end of season presser, is that maybe there is a need for this team to go out there and add a winger. I think that the U22 spot should still, and I don't think I said this in our last show, I think the U22 should still be a future striker for this team that is going to eventually take the torch and be that next guy up. As much as I like Osase, and he has been good, and I think you agree with this, we cannot look at him as a prospect and as a super high ceiling guy. I think that there is a world where he is a double-digit scorer and he improves upon this year. But is he the guy that I would think this is going to be my franchise attacker? And not like every team needs it. So let me make sure that I put that out there. Not every team needs a top 9. I feel like this system does well and would benefit out of having a guy like what is it, Milan Kukovic, the guy Kowalski.
Oh yeah. The guy
that they were looking at, and he's at Las Palmas that Craig kind of talked about during the presser. He said, hey, we had this guy that's doing pretty well. A guy like that would be amazing to just have on to continue to build, to continue to look at the future. So there are spots where I feel like this roster could improve, but the core group and what you were able to get out of 2025 and see those guys that are going to be consistent contributors and starters, right? Andrew Thomas, clearly your starter. Clonico Soriensi is a guy that is going to be getting a lot of minutes. Now you know exactly what you're going to get out of Roldan the Six, which is something that I feel is a huge thing for this team, that now they can say he's going to be your six. This is what he's going to do for the team. So there are a lot of spots that now you already know you have enough database to say this is the core group, and now we're going to be able to add on in different spots.
Right. And, just to kind of close the loop on Osaze de Rosario, nice player, absolutely a player who I am excited about. There is a reality that he's 24 years old and, he's got 120 professional appearances. He's scoring about every third game, which is not to say that's not awful. That's not an awful rate, but it's also not necessarily this is going to be a star in the future kind of rate either. And so I think we have to be realistic about what we can realistically expect Osaze de Rosario to blossom into. And I think, he's someone who is potentially a very able Danny Musovski replacement. I'm not quite ready to say that he is even going to reach Jordan Morris. And Jordan Morris has had a very good MLS. He's got over, he's pushing 100 goals in his career. So it's not like he's some slouch. But I just think we have to be like Osaze de Rosario is not the ceiling the Sounders should be shooting for, I guess is the point I'm making. He is a really great sort of foundational player. If you can guarantee that you can bring in an Osaze de Rosario player every year, you're doing really well. But you also need to have guys who overshoot that, who are, stars in the making, and Obed Vargas obviously plays a different position, but this is a guy who you could see developing into a best 11 type of talent. Jackson Reagan, another player you can see developing into a best 11 type of talent. Christian Roldan developed into a best 11 type of talent. And I think you need to keep pumping the pipeline with players who you think can get to that level. And, and that's what the U22 is for. It's for shooting your shot, it's for going for big, swinging big. And sometimes it misses, but that's the point of the mechanism, right? Is not to find roster filling type of talents. It's to find guys who might flame out, but also might be really good. And the Sounders seem to sort of be punting on the desire to find that type of player. And that's unfortunate.
Right. And look, that's not to say that, and we have done this pretty consistently, we understand and we know that this Sounders team has this phenomenal academy and this ability through Tacoma Defiance to get guys and perhaps find some really good U22 players. But adding a little bit of capita and going out there and looking for that high ceiling potential that's going to take your team to the next level is always great. And you don't have to be radical with your takes and say you have to go out there and just spend away. That's the way to win and shit on what the Sounders have done. And then you also don't have to be complacent. So the people who say, hey, you guys are complacent with what the team is providing. No, that's not the case. We're just highlighting that has been a phenomenal baseline that has been reliable and sustainable and has this team not just be a playoff contender every year and be in the playoffs, but be a true contenders, just like they were this season. But if you add and you look for those gems out there, it just makes it that much more possible that you're not going to just be a contender, but that you're going to find yourself in a MLS final or a Western Conference final.
Right. And I think that's sort of one of the things that I think I know I've said this many times, but the reality is that two things can be true. The Sounders can both be, I think people way overstate the need to spend big dollars to be competitive in MLS. Correct. There is a litany of research that shows that spending and success in MLS have virtually no correlation. But it's also true that there is a baseline that you're going to have to hit, and you have to spend something, and you have to be able to bring in new players from time to time. And that's the thing that I think, I worry about is I don't like to get wrapped up in the hyperbole of, the Sounders aren't spending enough to be competitive. Clearly, they are currently spending enough to be competitive. They are competitive at their current spending level. That's just facts, right? But that doesn't mean that we don't think that they can raise their ceiling by being smart about, finding better ways to, finding places where they can exploit more opportunities. And that doesn't mean they have to go out and sign $5 million DPs just because that would make some people happy. They're getting great production, frankly, out of the way they're using their DPs now. And I don't think the DP approach is necessarily wrong. But again, there are other parts of this roster that they can spend on, and it would be good to see them being a little bit more aggressive in an offseason like this one.
Yeah, and look at the Whitecaps. And I know that we all focus on the fact that they brought Thomas Mueller, and of course, he has without a doubt been a key amplifier of everything, and he's been so good in so many ways. But this Whitecaps team was good at the beginning of the year, and at the beginning of the year, their two DPs were Andres Cubas, who's phenomenal, but is still not a guy you're paying a crap ton of money for, and Ryan Gold, who had been hurt a lot of the time. And then the two U22 initiative guys were Pedro Vite, who they were able to let go to Pumas and sell him, and Elder Ocampo. So those are not necessarily huge signings. This is not a team that was throwing all the money out the back end of the roster, but they put together a very solid team, a very cohesive unit with a very good coach. And look where they are in right. Not just the final, but they were in a CONCACAF Cup final, I believe. Yes. And they have been a phenomenal Miami team all season long. Yeah, absolutely. So, and now they find themselves in an MLS Cup. So a lot of times I do feel like you're right. There is this huge misconception that if you spend a crap ton of money, it's going to guarantee you wins. And Atlanta will tell you that's not true. Miami over the time of their tenure in MLS will tell you that's not true. I mean, we could go on and on about teams that have spent a whole lot of money and haven't been able to come out with a lot of titles.
Absolutely. Well, I think this is probably a good place to wrap it up. Anything else you're hearing about any more updates? I know you went on a little bit of a Paul Rothrock thing recently. Anything that's worth really getting into? Any sense of what's going on with Stefan Frei?
Yes, I'm hearing that when it comes to Steph Frei, the negotiations are positive. Conversations seem to be tilting to him staying. Now, I say that with what I was told to be, cautiously optimistic with. I'm not hearing what the holdup is or why there hasn't been a decision made. Part of me, and this is just my educated guess, it's probably along the lines of whether or not Steph wants to continue. That's my guess. That might be what's holding up whether or not he's gonna come back to the team and sign. The Paul Rothrock one has been interesting. This morning during kickoff, Ari said something about the possibilities of Nashville SC. Yes, I had heard that they're a team that would not just be interested, but where he would fit in well. I haven't necessarily reported that there's any negotiations or anything like that, but that could definitely be a landing spot for him. I still think, and I'll reiterate what I said this morning on Paul Rothrock, I think that the writing's on the wall. I think that the negotiations have gone beyond the point of him staying with the Sounders to where, as it happens to many players, you end up playing elsewhere, even if it is for the same amount of money that you would have been playing at your current team, meaning the Sounders. And so I just think that he'll go out there and get maybe a bump on his pay or maybe similar to what he was going to get in Seattle, but it's more of a principal decision that will at some point end up having Paul Rothrock elsewhere next season.
Yeah. That's a bit of a bummer. Hopefully, we'll see how we'll continue to watch this one and kind of, I'm going to save my obituary for that when we actually know what's going on. But I'd be disappointed, but I understand why these things are happening, but I think like a lot of people, it'll be a blow to lose Paul Rothrock if that's what it comes to. The other bit of news, I don't know if we ever got to this or not, but João Paulo, I guess we have a couple bits of information that were linked, but I'll just share this one. It looks like Mike Morris is going to be going to New England Revolution, where he's going to join Marko Mitrovic's staff. That's who he was an assistant with for the U20s, and Mike Morris had been a favorite to be the Tacoma Defiance head coach, and so now that search is pretty much wide open. And I guess I'll transition that to you because you have a sort of secondary part of this, I believe.
Yes. If you go back and listen to the end of season presser, and I'm talking to the audience, of course, there is a point where I believe it's Brian who says that, we're hoping that at some point João Paulo comes back in some capacity as part of the club. I believe that there is an opportunity where João Paulo could be offered a position as a coach within the Tacoma Defiance. I think that, and I have said this before on the record, there was a moment and a time 6 months ago where João Paulo, was seriously considering becoming a coach. He has the IQ for it. He has the personality for it. He's a guy that demands respect as soon as he steps into that coaching room or that field. So as someone who knows his best attributes, I think that it would be a phenomenal move for him. We've seen him have so many difficulties physically trying to keep himself to the best of his form. And if anything, João Paulo is a guy that he's not going to enter the field if he's not going to give you 110%. And when you're at his age with the amount of injuries that he's had, that could have a serious effect on your body. And so if the next step in his career is coaching, I feel like being in a club, an organization like the Sounders that would provide you an immediate opportunity to handle a Tacoma Defiance team. And, who knows, at some point, maybe that becomes a pathway into you becoming a staff and a coaching staff member of the first team. Then that's something that you should definitely consider. And I don't think that there's anything on João Paulo's camp just yet. I think that he's without a doubt trying to figure out what his next move is and weigh his options and figure out what his next move is. But I do think that him being part of the coaching staff in Tacoma Defiance would provide a great situation for him. Very like to the move that Andy Rose made in Vancouver, where he could have probably played a couple more years, but he decided to get in early and start coaching. And now I would say that Andy Rose is maybe a year or two from having his own team. He's probably a guy taking interviews this offseason for other jobs. So I do think that there's an importance into taking those opportunities while they're there, because they're not always there, and understanding how much effort that João Paulo has put into his career. Seeing him move on to being a coach would be phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely seems like he has the mind to be a coach. Whether or not he wants to do it this year or, down the road remains to be seen. But I have no doubt that he'll be successful once he ever does it. And, you don't have to look that far to find examples of players who transition into coaching take over at the MLS Next Pro level, and then quickly move into MLS. Michael Bradley, a very similar type of player to João Paulo. He coached Red Bull 2 for 1 year, I believe, and he is close to being hired, I think, by the Red Bulls to be their next head coach. And that's a very quick transition. I assume he was doing some other work before he took over the Red Bull 2 project, but it can be a pretty fast path. And, even like not to get too crazy, but like you look at Zinedine Zidane, and here's a guy who went from coaching Real Madrid B to coaching the first team and winning Champions League in, the span of like 2 years. So, these things, it can happen fast. It can happen really fast.
Yeah, Gattuso, it felt like he was so quickly from coaching at the club level and eventually coaching with Italy. There's a ton of, scenarios out there like Xavi and, other players that they're at a different level, of course. But the coaching is very meticulous, and you have to be prepared for changing the way you look at the game. But when you have been there and you are one of those midfielders specifically that sees the game differently, like Gonzalo Pineda, of course, it is an easy transition. And I think that João Paulo is a guy that his English has improved a whole lot. He is a student of the game. So yeah, man, I feel like he'd be a great fit for this organization as a coach in the Tacoma Defiance side, if that's what he decides to do.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's hope. Well, Niko, thanks for hopping on and giving us some time on this. I think this is a really good example of what we hope to do this off season. I'm also going to be doing some interviews with sort of random different folks. Next week, I'm talking to someone about the World Cup draw, specifically getting into the way it looks for Seattle and for the U.S. national team. So look for that. But Niko, I'm sure we will continue to talk this off season. Anytime there is news, I am happy to jump on with you and bang out an episode. But thanks for doing this, Niko.
No problem. I want to add one last piece because I know that people might wonder. Yes, Necaxa is a team that it might be coming in a very particular time that they're gonna be signing Danny Leyva, because their coach Fernando Gago, who honestly has been a disaster as a coach, was sacked just like 3 or 4 weeks ago. They have just recently decided that they are going, I believe, with Uruguayan coach Martin Varini, and that might be interesting on how a new player that maybe the front office god would fit into his plans. But we hope nothing but the best for Danny Leyva. But that is something that I feel like I wanted to clarify, because I could see it in the comments where how do they get a player when the coach just not even necessarily fully signed just yet, and they just let go of Fernando Gago. So just in case you were wondering, that is a situation, and there are times specifically in Liga MX where sacking a coach is just like taking off a shoe sometimes. It is the sporting directors that handle the roster built, and then they'll bring in a coach to fit that group of players.
Yeah. No, that's always a good reminder that the way Liga MX runs and the way MLS run, especially when it comes to coaching, could hardly be more different. But in any case, Niko, thanks for that, and thanks for doing this. You're listening to. I'm going to get out of here. I'm Jeremiah Shan. You have been listening to No Study at This, part of the Sounder at Heart podcast network, and we will catch you next time.
Let's go, Sounders.